Hello, and welcome to today's webinar. I'll be kicking things off. We still have a number of folks coming in. For today's webinar, we have our planning for long-term electric school bus success. Getting a few buses in service is an important accomplishment and a great start. And planning a large deployment from scratch is still a significant undertaking, even once you have a few in service. So today we're looking at what it takes to get closer towards all the way, really, in planning for the long term. We have a great panel today with representatives from World Resource Institute, 2 school districts moving quickly towards electrified fleets, and industry representatives in infrastructure, planning and deployment, as well as vehicle manufacture. I'd like to recognize 2 of CT's leadership circle members who are on today, BYD DBA Ride and Jacobs, who are both part of today's webinar. On today's webinar, myself, Eric Bigelow, Director of Midwest Operations and Head of Engineering at CTE. Brittany Barrett, Senior Manager of E-Mobility with the World Resources Institute. Jason Yan, Director of Sales Operations, BYD, DBA Ride. David Nguyen, Senior Project Manager with Jacobs. Jackie Hayes, Assistant Director of Contract Operation and Fleet for Boston Public Schools. Jasmine Harrison, Business Operations Director, and Bryant Shaw, Sustainability Services, both with the Dallas Independent School District. First, a little about CTE, the Center for Transportation and the Environment. We are a 501c3 nonprofit engineering and planning firm celebrating 30 years this year, focusing on zero-emission vehicle deployment success. Our mission is to enable a successful transition to a zero-emission transportation system. We do this through leading-edge technical projects, engineering deployment support and analysis. We have a national presence with offices in Atlanta, Berkeley, Los Angeles, and St. Paul. And with that, really kind of highlighting our work across the country, want to show and highlight that we really work not just on the coasts, but certainly from kind of really across the whole spectrum of zero-emission vehicle deployments and challenges from urban to rural and all climates across the country. So this is all of these are zero-emission projects we have in our portfolio, but all the gold stars are zero-emission school bus projects, which are accelerating rapidly. I'm sure as everyone on this webinar is seeing the dramatic increase in pace and change in the zero-emission school bus industry. So excited to talk more about that today. This webinar is really looking at longer range planning, and as said at the start, getting a couple buses out and in service is an important accomplishment. A lot of challenge, a lot of new processes and procedures to get in place. Thinking towards the whole fleet requires a different mindset. So for why to plan, fundamentally, more planning reduces your risk, and is especially true in the electric school bus world with the tremendous pace of change the industry is seeing, the amount of funding which has accelerated the rate of deployments, and also just the magnitude of the projects that are getting underway. Key need in this is looking at feasibility. Feasibility in this case is, how well do the technology meet the needs? And this can be very local to a school district's needs. Another key point and reason that you need to get longer term detailed planning in place is on the infrastructure deployment. So you get the right hardware and at the right time. Infrastructure projects, as we've seen in the past decade, just in zero emission vehicle deployment is hard, is challenging, and requires a lot of coordination from a lot of stakeholders. And also really to prepare you for discussions with your utility and any other key stakeholders. And getting ready for those discussions with your utilities having a good planning baseline lets you understand and be ready for discussions around time of use rates, or understanding what year different numbers of megawatts of loads may come online. And your utilities will need that information, and you'll need it to really engage with them for a longer term discussion. Our approach on this, how CTE approaches transition planning methodology, is we have different phases, starting roughly from the top left, ending on the bottom right with the zero emission vehicle plan. So our approach is to start from kind of the end user's needs and build out, and start from vehicle needs and how that fits with the available technology and time, as well as the replacement cycle. And carry that process through until there's an entire plan that covers the whole gamut, including workforce development, the redundancy and resilience needs that the fleet needs to be prepared for to handle to meet the mission, and ultimately helping choose sort of the lowest total cost option and understand how to get there. There's technical feasibility is a key part, but also financial feasibility and how to close the gap. And pull that all into a plan. So highlighting just a couple steps of what this looks like is we start as on the route feasibility. So this is real outputs from analysis that we've done, looking crucially at time in service, thinking about morning, midday, and afternoon runs, availability of midday charging, and how fast that charging can run. And whether or not, most fundamentally, under a challenging scenario, does the technology, and technology as vehicles and infrastructure, does that fit your what's available today, what's available in the future, and how to put those together. An important important piece of this also is thinking, what percentage of your routes are a good fit for different battery capacities that are available. So and helping choose amongst different options and capacities that are possible. And ultimately, going through this quickly, ultimately where this ends up is a transition plan. This is a condensed graph that we had worked with an end user to develop. But ultimately, what does that plan look like? When do you need infrastructure in place? When do you purchase vehicles? When do you need funding in place? And having a framework to tie all those conversations together so that the right pieces can happen at the right time, and the right stakeholders worried about the right pieces at the right time. So mentioned, I know probably news to no one, the EPA Clean School Bus Grant Program is open. So this is a bit of a sea change in how this program has worked in the past. There's a large amount of funding available to help support this. And again, the grant program has a lot of information out there, but I just want to, if anyone hasn't noticed, to highlight that the grant program is a different shape than the first round. So a lot of what CT does is grant supported zero emission vehicle project deployments. We're excited to be able to support the Clean School Bus Grant Program through both technical consulting to help those projects be successful, and grant writing support to help hopefully bring the funding in. So be very excited to chat with anyone about that. My email address is there. Feel free to reach out to me if needed. And with that, quick introduction on zero emission vehicle planning and the big picture. At this stage, like to hand over to Brittany Barrett with World Resources Institute. Brittany is the Senior Manager of e-mobility for WRI's Electric School Bus Initiative. She has 2 decades of bus operations experience, and over the last 2 years has supported dozens of school districts in their transition to electric school buses. Brittany.
Thank you so much, Eric. I appreciate it. Thanks for having WRI and the Electric School Bus Initiative. I think I need to tell you next slide as we go. So let's just jump right in. A little bit about WRI's Electric School Bus Initiative. In collaboration with partners and communities, our aim is to create unstoppable momentum for an equitable transition of the U.S. school bus fleet, making them all electric by 2030, bringing health, climate, and economic benefits to children and families across the country. We're here to help make the electric school bus opportunity a reality, and we work with stakeholders at all levels to accelerate an equitable transition to ESBs. We offer technical assistance, expert staff, one-of-a-kind data, and practical resources. We partner with and support organizations and communities nationwide who are doing important work to bring electric school buses to their own towns, cities, states, and country. And we believe it's imperative that the transition to electric school buses be equitable, with a focus on the communities that need the assistance the most. Next slide, please. I don't think I need to go into a lot of detail to many of you here on the whys behind electrifying the U.S. school bus fleet. There are a lot of opportunities that this transition presents. I'll touch briefly on a few. The improved health and cognitive outcomes for children. Exhaust from traditional diesel school buses is unsafe, with proven links to serious physical health issues, as well as cognitive development impacts, putting students' health and academic achievement at risk. So there's cleaner air. There's also the opportunity for reduced operating expenses. There's lower maintenance and fuel cost savings over time. There's an opportunity for new jobs in green manufacturing. We also believe that electric school buses create a tipping point for the medium and heavy duty electrification. And there's opportunity for resiliency and renewables integration. It can unlock significant storage via vehicle to grid for utilities, which can be used to reduce the variability of clean energy generation and provide extra capacity during emergency responses. Next slide, please. So just a little bit deeper on my point on the clean air benefits of electric school buses. It is well known that 60% of low-income students take the bus, compared to 45% of non-low-income students. The burden of air pollution falls disproportionately on BIPOC communities, and the impact of that is disproportionately felt. Native American children are 1.5 times more likely to have asthma as non-Hispanic white children. Next slide. So while electrification can accelerate decarbonization while bringing direct, tangible benefits to every community in the US, the transition is not without risk. Communities of color and low-income communities are often historically the last to benefit from development and transport initiatives. They are frequently left out of decision-making and often face disparities in access and mobility. The history of structural racism and discrimination in the United States has led to long-standing structural barriers that foster inequities in education and school bus transport, and disparities in access and mobility for these populations. As with any transition of this scale, without careful attention, the electrification of the U.S. school bus fleet can either serve to address these longstanding inequities or further perpetuate them. Next slide, please. The ESBI has committed to centering equity and developing an equity framework to outline the approach that project staff will use to achieve its equity objectives. Why? Because we want to ensure underserved communities are the first to have the opportunity to experience the health and societal benefits of ESBs. And we believe that with purposeful focus on the multiple and overlapping dimensions of equity, the transition to ESBs could perpetuate ingrained systems of inequity and further the burden on BIPOC communities. So we want to make sure that that is not what happens. Next slide, please. So we know that there are barriers to electrification, but they are not insurmountable. Each of the issues listed here, higher upfront costs, limited capacity, new technology, infrastructure, and scale, it's really a set of questions that need to be asked and decisions that need to be made along the way. And the way to do that is to have a plan. Next slide, please. These are a few images from some of the transition planning workshops that WRI has hosted, and it's called Framing the Opportunity. And that's really what this is. Transition planning is a key moment to bring together stakeholders, identify others to bring in, set a joint vision for project success, and get your team educated and excited. One of the districts listed here, Dallas, you'll hear from Bryant and Jasmine who participated in it in just a little bit. Next slide, please. So the transition plan is around coming together with this roadmap to electrification. This illustrates some of the key steps and decision points in your planning process. While some tasks can be done concurrently, many build upon each other. And this process means that there are a lot of groups that need to be plugged in to the planning process in order to ensure a smooth transition. Each step of the roadmap offers an opportunity to embed equity. On the next slide, I have a few examples for that, but we also have more available in our online step-by-step guide. Next slide, please. I'll highlight just a few of these actions from the slide here. Under foundation setting, this is at the very beginning of your process. Take mapping stakeholders. This is a basic step anyone should take when undertaking a multi-year project such as this. It can help identify actors on a matrix of low to high interest and low to high influence. And it ensures you don't miss key groups that might either need to be consulted or potentially just kept informed. Under procurement and installation, let's look at criteria for RFPs and other procurements. This is going to be a significant spend for districts and the opportunity to ensure that the district's own goals around women and minority business participation are met. Potentially for equipment purchases, you could add points for OEMs that have community benefits agreements with their workforce, or they have their own specific sustainability goals. Under performance benefits and scaling, I think you're going to hear more about this later from Jackie, but bringing drivers and mechanics into the process is critical to your project's success. Ensuring your plan for proper training for these workforces with both the initial delivery and ongoing maintenance is going to be key. On my next slide, I'm going to dive into a few more strategies around the charging infrastructure and operations planning. So Eric, if you want to go forward. So here I have the schools, the depots, and the routes. While technical feasibility is ultimately going to guide which routes get electrified first, school districts can incorporate an equity lens into the process by considering which schools, depots, or routes will receive an ESB first. The best approach will vary based on district geography, demographics, air quality, number of depots, routes, schools, and more. Let me give you an example. I remember working with a transportation director who told me he was concerned about a board member requesting that these new buses that were coming be put on a route in his community first. And he wanted to know, how do I handle a situation like that? Well, incorporating equity into your route planning is a great way to address that issue. By having a plan in place to deploy buses to serve schools with higher numbers of low income or children of color first, there's little room to question the operations planning. There's also many commonly available metrics that you can use to evaluate the standing of these schools. If you have multiple depots that could house your ESBs, you can plan to prioritize electrifying depots that reside within environmental justice communities or communities that need additional resiliency. Deploying buses on routes that serve neighborhoods with the highest level of air pollution first, or even choosing routes serving special needs students, are two approaches that you can use to incorporate equity while also serving your operational needs. Next slide, please. So those were just a few examples of ways that you can integrate equity into your planning process. We have a lot more available on our website. So these are just some examples of the tools and resources. We have a market report and buyer's guide, new edition will be coming out in the next few months. We have the roadmap tool, which is an Excel spreadsheet that lists all of the steps from that graphic. It has an outline of timing and links to the resources you'll need for that phase, and you can fill it in with your own dates to kind of figure out what your process looks like. In addition to these many tools, Eric, if you'll go to the next slide, we also offer direct technical assistance to districts. We have ongoing office hours, we support working groups, and for certain districts, we also provide deep ongoing support. We prioritize our resources for certain districts that are historically under-resourced, but we are available to speak to anyone. We have additional plans to directly support the Clean School Bus Program Round 2 grant applications, and should have a template narrative and other tools available on the website soon. Next slide. And that is all I have. There's our website listed there where you can find many of the tools and resources I mentioned. And with that, I will turn it back to Eric.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Brittany. Next up, I'd like to welcome Jackie Hayes from Boston Public Schools. Boston recently launched its first 20 electric school buses and is gathering data to plan for full fleet electrification. Jackie Hayes led the pilot and is here to share about Boston Public Schools' experience so far. Jackie.
Eric, we can go to the next slide, please. I just wanted to give a quick overview of some of our kind of like district stats, which I think sometimes are helpful when you're trying to see whether your district kind of fits in or not with what we have to share. We're a district with approximately 22,000 students who use transportation, about 50,000 students across the whole district. We provide transportation for 221 schools, and that's both BPS schools as well as non-BPS schools, so charter schools, private parochials. We also provide about 2,500 athletics and field trips each semester, which adds up to a lot of additional transportation, both midday and at the end of the day. And then finally, if you know Boston, you know that we have a lot of weather, both very cold weather and some pretty warm weather. And then finally, we have about 6,000 students who receive door-to-door transportation, and that is on smaller vehicles, and that is around the city mostly, although some do go outside the city as far as 50 miles one way. Today we have 700, we actually have increased this number to 710 active drivers, and our goal is to get to 720 by the fall of 2023. Next slide, please. So the first question that I think a lot of districts are asking, at least we were asking, is why go electric? The city of Boston has been committed to greening our fleet for a long time now, and we started with propane in 2016, and just about 60% of the fleet is propane at this point, with a focus on our smaller buses. The buses that we mainly need to work on are really our diesel buses, and with the improvements in the electric bus options, the big bus electrification seemed like we might be in a good spot to match on that. So next slide, please. Aside from the obvious that there's an opportunity to green, we are really fortunate to have a mayor who came into office last year, who was really committed to electrifying our fleet, and that really jump-started our electrification in Boston with the goal to electrify the whole fleet by 2030. Some additional kind of fleet facility facts. We have 3 bus yards. We don't own any of them. We provide maintenance on our buses as well as operations through a vendor contract. Our buses are primarily parked outdoors, which means they would also be charging outdoors. And I think I mentioned all of our yards are leased property. Currently, we have an entirely Bluebird fleet. We have 740 buses. 620 of those are active daily. And then, as I said, we're focusing on our big buses for electrification first. And then we do plan, and this gets into what Brittany had previewed, we do maintain our buses in-house with full garages across each of our yards. And right now our plan, and we believe the only way to operationally be really successful with electrification is if we are able to maintain those buses in-house. And that will mean helping our maintenance workforce be up to date on how to maintain high voltage buses, but also making sure that our facilities are ready for maintaining high voltage buses. Next slide, please. So when we started our electrification pilot in April of last year, so really a year ago, we had a lot of questions in Boston about feasibility. Just straight up, our electric bus is something that even could conceivably work in Boston. We had questions about safety. We had questions about whether they could complete our routes, whether they could be useful in cold weather. What about when it gets really cold? We have a lot of days under 20 degrees, especially in the morning when the buses are deploying. And we were really focused on really the buses and the chargers and the installation of those items. And that was the main thing that we were concerned about. So we decided to launch this pilot with 20 buses because we wanted to test out really if this is even a realistic option for Boston Public Schools. So that is where we focused first. We placed that bus order in very beginning of May, end of April. We began identifying partners for deployment. You need people who are going to oversee buying your chargers, installing the chargers, electricians, trenching if you need it, all of those things. And you can see in this picture, we actually went with an above ground charging plan for this first 20 because of some of the questions about the installation and the space we were installing on. We ultimately finished our build out in February of 2023, just in time for the buses to arrive. And we began to get really concerned, I would say, in the fall, less about the buses and the chargers we would buy, but much more about the people who would be maintaining and driving our buses. And that's when we really pivoted to focusing on the people and the training. So what I would say is that we have ultimately come up with a plan that works for training, and we are looking forward to expanding that, and that for long-term planning, that's going to be a significant portion of our work. So I'll go back to Eric. Thanks, Eric.
Great. Thanks so much, Jackie. Super exciting with the pace of change at Boston. That's great. Excellent. Next up, welcome Jason Yan. Jason is the Director of Sales Operations for BYD Coach and Bus, DBA as Ride, Coach and Bus. Jason joined BYD in 2016 as an electric transit bus project lead, and before that worked in Silicon Valley in the power battery industry. Jason, take it away.
Thank you very much, Eric, and thanks everybody's time. So my name is Jason. I'm Director of the Sales Operation. Next slide, please. Thank you. So BYD DBA as the Ride. So we're the international global company, and we have the multiple business division based in California. So we have the battery electric forklift, BYD Coach and Bus dedicatedly working on the transit, coach, and school bus, and also the BYD truck, BYD auto, BYD electronics, battery, and also the Skyrail and Sky Shuttle. And all those automotives we supplied it in years are the zero emission, the battery electric technology. Next slide, please. So this is our facility located in Lancaster, California. Is the 550,000 square foot EV manufacturing and started from the 2011. So next slide, please. So some quick facts about the BYD. So we're the global company with the 650,000 global employees, and our headquarters in California is in Pasadena, California, and the manufacturing facility located in Lancaster, California is a 550,000 square foot place. And we are very proudly to work with the Smart Union 105, our entire workshop, and we're the first one to be the union workshop in the EV manufacturing in America. So as the global leader, we have delivered over 2.5 million electric cars and over 85,000 electric buses, and also 15,000 electric trucks globally. Over 850 of them are in the United States. So not only assemble and manufacture in American, but also service in American. So we have a multiple service location in the Midwest, Pacific Northwest, Bay Area, and also the East Coast. So as 2023 BYD market cap, the value is over 100 billion US dollars. It's also one of the 500 Fortune 500 company in the world. So next slide, please. So the one of the key technology we are using for our battery electric school buses is the LFP battery technology. So that's also the BYD battery technology in all the public transportation applications. So for the LFP batteries, which provides you the most, the highest the safety standard, and also give you the longer endurance, longer lifetime, and safer in the transportation applications. So next slide, please. So by now, BYD already announced the two different bus types, battery electric school bus types, the Type A and Type D. After this meeting, if any attendees has any technical question regarding those the buses, feel free to let me know. But just a quick introduction of those two buses. The standard version of those buses, the Type A, the small bus equipped with up to 30 passengers, and Type D up to 84. And so the Type A has the over 156 kilowatt hour, and Type A has the over 156 kilowatt hour battery, and Type D has over 255 kilowatt hour battery. Next slide, please. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. So can you back to the last slide? Yes, thank you. So the major difference for us and the other OEMs is because we do the vertical integration. So the major propulsion system are from design and manufactured by BYD, including the battery, drive axle, and the high voltage component, the system. So it's all fully integrated since the 2009. So for today's the webinar, I would like to share some idea with all the school and also the fleet managers and transportation managers why the electric school bus is the long-term solution. And regardless, so of course, school bus operation is a very electric bus friendly operation compared to the transit industry or the shuttle coaster industry. Different with the 15 to 20 hours transit operation. You know, school bus only operate normally maybe 4 hours in the morning and 4 hours in the afternoon. So you have to wait enough time to charge the bus, which means you don't need, which means from the technology wise, you don't need the very high charging power rate to fast charge the bus in order, because in that way it can maximize the performance of the battery. During the day, you can charge for 2-3 hours, and overnight you have over 10 hours for the charging. Besides of the policy encouragement for the support, let's just talk about the economic aspect. Next slide, please.
And hey, Jason, I gotta have you wrap up if you can. So
say it again. I'm sorry.
Yeah, if we gotta jump on to the next folks to keep it going if you can. So is there last slide, I think?
Yes, I think that's the last slide. So based on the research, so we did research with the 12 years operation. So the electric Type D bus can save you over $197, and for the Type A, it can save you $140,000, including the fuel cost and maintenance cost, and also the incentive for the charging. So yeah, and the next slide basically is just to give all the school the remind is doing the infrastructure research before the buses that will help you and to receive and deploy the buses successfully. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Jason. Excellent. And I'd like to welcome Bryant Shaw and Jasmine Harrison from the Dallas ISD. Bryant's a native Texan and Dallas ISD graduate. And his roles in public education have included custodian, HVAC tech, teacher, coach, and administrator, and returned from retirement to become the school district's first sustainability manager. Jasmine Harrison, as well from Dallas ISD, has served in the education field for over 20 years. And before Dallas ISD, she served in various roles in the public education system in San Diego, California. So Bryant, Jasmine, welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. Yeah, our story begins in 2020, in the spring of 2020, when our school board passed a sustainability and environmental resolution. It was passed unanimously, which created an environmental and sustainability stakeholders committee. The committee met for 6 months during the pandemic, and one of the suggestions, one of the recommendations was to transition our school bus fleet to an all-electric fleet. That was not seriously considered until the summer of 2022, when we became aware of the Clean School Bus Rebate Program. Upon application, we began looking for assistance and contacted WRI, which and they organized a two-day workshop for us during September, which provided a great deal of focus and brought many of the different departments in the district, key departments in the district together. I'll add to that CTE did an analysis of our routes, which made us realize what was possible and what we needed to rethink. Next slide. Right now, I'd like to bring on Dr. Jasmine Harrison, and she'll talk about the context in which we're undertaking this project.
Thank you, Mr. Shah. So here's just some facts about Dallas ISD and who we are. We have about 240 schools. The majority of our students that we do serve are economically disadvantaged. The square miles that we cover is 384. So with that, we are a 3-tiered route system. So our bell schedules they have different start times. So we're able to transport our elementary students, then middle, then high. As it pertains to our fleet in our department, we have 4 different service centers, 3 we own and 1 we lease. And we have about 1,100 buses. 57% of them are diesel fueled, 34% gas, and 9% propane. So that's just an overall idea of who we are. We transport roughly about 40,000 students on every year. Next, please. Now, our immediate short-term goal within the next 2 years is to really have 20 electric buses that is part of our fleet that are specifically being assigned to routes that are located in disadvantaged communities. Through this experience, we hope to have a better understanding of what it entails as we continue to achieve our long-term vision. And I'll turn it over to Mr. Shah.
Our long-term vision is to have a policy in place by 2030, requiring that all future buses being procured by the district be electric buses. That, at the rate we're going right now, that may be even sooner. We also set the goal of 2040 as for having attained an all-electric fleet. We're also looking at beating that goal as well. Next slide. So some approaches to supporting our long-term ESB adoption. Naturally, we want to capitalize on all state and federal funding opportunities. Amongst those, the 45W and 30C tax credits. We want to build out any future building we're doing right now, and we are going through a bond program right now. So we want to build out for any future infrastructure growth. We want to achieve bus and charger critical mass at bus slots for utility tariff relief. Expand our charger network through purchases and shared use agreements with Dallas Area Rapid Transit. Prioritize our bus routes. Propose and pass ESB only board policy after proof of concept, which I mentioned earlier. Provide quarterly board updates on transition progress. This is really important for us to keep our project in front of the board at all times. And right now at this stage, they're asking all the time. So that's a good sign. Fall and spring communications on ESBs and clean energy shared through our communications department externally and internally. Present on ESBs and clean energy whenever possible at state and national conferences. We've done that twice so far this spring. And develop operations and career and technical workforce in cooperation with our community college system, Dallas College. Next slide. So here are indicators of success, broken down into 3 categories: stakeholder indicators of success. First, prioritize deployment of ESBs to disadvantaged and underserved communities, improvement in student health outcomes, and decrease in student absenteeism. Cost indicators of success: reduction in operation cost per mile, maintenance cost savings, dollars saved by using managed software charging. Environmental indicators of success: an annual decrease in pollutants, volatile organic compounds, and particulate matter. It's worth noting that the North Texas region is currently in severe non-attainment for ozone pollution. And I think that wraps it up for us, Eric.
Muted. Great. Thanks so much, Brian. Exciting to see. I know it's a rapid change, so and a lot moving. So thanks for sharing that. And get some questions later as well. So thank you, and I'd like to welcome from Jacobs Engineering, David Nguyen. At Jacobs, David is a part of the transportation decarbonization practice, focusing on municipal and transit and school bus fleets, in addition to clients in the aviation and port industries. His past experience includes EV charger constructability reviews and estimation, and helping school district clients deploy their charging infrastructure in a cost-effective way. So, and David, one quick thing before I hand it over is I just want for a note for folks on the webinar, the recording of this will be distributed at the end. I know we've gotten a couple of questions about that. So it is being recorded and will be distributed. So with that, David, take it away.
Thanks, Eric. Yeah, and you mentioned that's what my past experience on future proofing. So I'm definitely going to touch on that later. So a little bit about Jacob. So first off, really excited to be here with CT, with WRI, true leaders in the industry, as well as with the other panelists. So one thing we have in common is that net zero emission carbon goal, that reduction of emissions via electric school bus tailpipe or lack of tailpipe emissions. So Jacob shares that same view. One thing that I just want to touch on really quick is, with our operations and business travel, we have right now 100% renewable energy. And more importantly, every project that we work on as Jacobs globally has to have some level of climate response or other decarbonization goals. Next slide. So I'm just going to jump right into a successful deployment. So the title of this webinar is long-term. And first thing that for a long-term successful deployment is really getting, from day one, where you're supposed to start and where you're going to end up, and those steps that go along the way. I know Eric showed a timeline, and I think Brittany had a timeline as well. So this is a different variation of timeline, one of which we've developed over the last 4 or 5 years working mostly in the transit bus space. One thing that I hear a lot when talking to school bus clients is this has never been done before, or there's just no markers to go off of in terms of what is success and where should I start. And I think that's partially true. The vehicles are different, the passengers are different, but really there are a lot of similarities with the transit bus market. And this has been done before, the transition from diesel and CNG or propane vehicles to electric vehicles. And these steps are steps that we talk about with our transit bus clients, but we also talk about our school bus clients. And so we've changed the stakeholders a little bit, but generally this is a pretty tried and true timeline. So I just want to kind of note, maybe on the left, starting in the dark purple, the importance of grants and incentive funding. Again, going back to transit bus, we've been doing grants and funding with transit bus for low and zero emission vehicles for the last 3 or 4 years. So it's definitely nothing new. And this new round of EPA funding kind of mimics that in some ways. And so, identifying the internal team for your e-bus team at the district, but also really focusing on who's your grant writers. Are you going to have internal? Are you going to be external with like with CTE? And how do you want to approach that? And that could take a good 4 to 6 months trying to figure out who the right folks are to have with your funding. Next is stakeholder engagement. They've also talked about stakeholder engagement, but I'll add a little story here too on the importance of I have PTA in the light green. It could be also any level of community engagement that's external. There's definitely a socializing of thoughts and concepts internally, but externally you also have that same requirement to be a successful program. I've had conversations with school districts that have had the funding and the means to deploy electric buses, but they didn't because of the optics of spending $1 million on buses versus funding elsewhere in the district. While they have completely different funding sources and completely different buckets of money, to the external person looking in, that could be something you want to manage. Steps 3, 4, and 5, they're pretty standard, right? So the big wings that drive these timelines are lead times, chargers, transformers, switchgear, and essentially the vehicles themselves too. Jacobs has a pretty robust project management, construction management, K through 12 business. We've been doing it for the last 40 years. So when it comes to actual capital improvement planning and facility project coordination, that's something we can help with, or a lot of your consultants that you already work with could help with. So those are pretty known entities. But I do want to note step 7. So step 7, I feel like tends to get bypassed a little bit when you start getting into the implementation phase. And it needs to be, first and foremost, a phase that is like protected and it has at least 2 months. And that is the pilot vehicle deployment and data collection. So before you put passengers on the vehicle, but after you get them on the road, after you take delivery, what are your processes looking like from a maintenance and driver standpoint, but also from a data collection standpoint? I've seen too many times where the data collection provider, whether that be a software system on your bus or your charger, just isn't working the way it should be. And that's quite important to make sure you're compliant with a lot of your grant funding. Also, charger and vehicle interoperability, which is a key piece as well. Next slide. So before we go and wrap this up, I do want to kind of highlight 3 elements that we've seen that drive not just short-term planning, but really long-term planning success for fleets. The fleets that come back to us 2-3 years after we help build a site and say, you know what, that was a good idea, or that wasn't a good idea. So those elements can be just as basic as the site layout. So for those of you who've gone through this, site layout that is vendor and vehicle type agnostic can sometimes prove to be more challenging than it seems. A lot of transit and school buses OEMs have ports within different areas of the bus, and there's not necessarily a standardized location or number of ports per bus and vehicle type. So how do you plan for not just the vehicle OEM that you're buying right now, but the vehicle OEM you're going to buy 10 years from now, or even 2 years from now? You're going to have a mixed fleet of vehicle OEMs, or definitely a mixed vehicle class. So how do you plan that? And so really, the recommendation there is to go through those shreds and go through those site layout schemes to just make sure that you're thinking through all of these small details, because they do exponentially cause issues down the line if you're not careful. And then lastly, want to just kind of reiterate the importance of power modeling. So you can see the Fleet Max snapshots below. I just want to say that power modeling has to come before utility engagement. It has to come before charger management software selection. I see all too often charger management selection, all the different checks and functions that you can buy off of those different software platforms. That has to come only after you know what you actually need. So use the data to empower you, and I'll leave it there. Thanks again, Eric.
Excellent. Thanks, David. Great. We have time for some Q&A. I'd like to, we've received some questions in through the Q&A. So if folks do have more questions, please feel free to send those in. I'd like to invite the panelists, if you turn on your video, please, and join for a short discussion. So I'll try and keep these quick, because I know we have a number of questions, but for Bryant and Jasmine, I wanted to ask you quick. You mentioned a little bit about either coordinated charging infrastructure or and use across other municipal fleets. Is there anything more you can share about how that got started and where it's going?
Yes, Clean School Bus Initiative, WRI, Electric School Bus Initiative, brought us together, as I said earlier, in December. And one of the stakeholders that we had in attendance was Dallas Area Rapid Transit, as well as the city of Dallas. And that's when we began these conversations. So right now, we're working on creating our network and including DART in those conversations as well.
Excellent, great. Yeah, charging infrastructure has a really high capital cost. So anywhere anyone can increase the utilization percent of those is definitely a great opportunity. Brittany, if I can point one to you, there's a question that came in on asking about kind of either upfit or refits of vehicles. And if you have, I guess, knowledge of where that may be headed a little bit down the road, or a way to support that.
Sure. I think there was a question in terms of like funding for what we would call repowers. Currently the EPA funding does not cover that. WRI has published an article on repowers. It's really an interesting technology. It's not new. It's newer to school buses, but it's been done in lots of other contexts, public transit vehicles and other medium and heavy duty, and in Europe. So we're exploring it. It seems like a viable option, but as of right now, I am not aware of any funding source currently that can be used to purchase those.
Excellent, thanks. And I think it's especially, I think, for school buses with the number of vehicles that are out there and the similarities, I think, across model years is a really interesting place where upfits or repowers really could be a good fit. So note for any EPA folks that may be on. David, a question for you. So there's a lot of questions around, is there enough electricity, said in one way or another. Now, how's power availability in projects that you've looked at? How does that discussion usually go? Are you finding there's enough electricity, I guess, to go around?
Shorter answer is that, yeah, the electricity is there. It's just a matter on the capital and the time it takes to get it to where you need to go. And I think going back to my last point on power modeling, what goes into power modeling is, almost every aspect of your system. So your battery size, your vehicle routes, the route planning that you were showing, Eric, CTE does, that's all plays into what that power load requirement from the utility actually is. And so I think all of those elements, if change, if you increase the amount of buses or change your routes, you can dramatically change the amount of power you need. So I think those should be looked at first, but obviously utility power capacity is seen often as a constraint. And that's why we need to talk to utility first and foremost to see what you're playing with.
Excellent. Yeah, and I'd say from our experience as well, there's some power, you may not have all the power, and that's where getting into that roadmap discussion of what you need when is a really critical piece. So Jackie, there's a question that came in, I guess, on funding. If you can speak to that a little bit of how you're able to pull pieces together for this first round, if you can share a little more about how that worked.
So our first round of funding was a combination of our existing fleet maintenance funding and then also ARPA funding that was granted to us by the city, and that supported the initial infrastructure build out. We were not awarded EPA funding, but we are really hopeful for the grant funding coming out in the second round.
Okay, great, thanks. Jason, question for you on your buses. So I guess on the school buses, are these available today? If so, how many are out there? If you can speak a little bit more about kind of availability and how to find more about them.
Sure. So yeah, the Type A and Type D school buses are available, and actually we started officially to open to the public to accepting the order for the school bus from the middle of last year, and by now we are going to deliver 139 of them from the October this year. And for us for those electric school buses, we are using the same propulsion system with our transit buses, which we have delivered over 85,000 units globally. So the only difference is cabin seats and the cosmetic equipment.
Excellent. Great, thanks, Jason. And then question, sorry, trying to coordinate here. I guess maybe a question to David. So when thinking about these kind of larger planning projects, is there something you've run across consistently that sort of, what you wish folks knew when you get started? What's maybe something that you've seen as a consistent challenge of like, man, I wish people knew this or came ready or knew this was coming?
Yeah, I mean, coming from, deploying them, some deployment experience, I think one of my pet peeves is definitely the site layout, charge report, cable management, seeing cables not reach buses, keying cables, weird angles. So definitely putting the time and effort to plan that out and to really, visualize it is really important. And so that's something that I would definitely always harp on. But another item would be that the hard part isn't before getting the buses. The hard part is after you get the buses, and working with things like charger interoperability, maintenance training, your challenges once they're on the road. And that's why I also talk about my step 7 of making sure you have a soft opening of buses on the road before you put them into service. And then that's true across all industries, including transit as well.
Excellent, thanks, Dave. Yeah, it's and as I mentioned at the start, it's a really fascinating time with both the pace of change of available technologies and I think really a lot of momentum around zero emission buses, because it seems almost like, well, why isn't everybody doing this already? Well, there's still some, quite more than a couple challenges. Question came in, I guess that like this for both our school districts. So if you can share kind of a surprise or lesson learned in your infrastructure development and deployment so far, what's something you ran into that was surprising? Jackie, maybe I can start with you.
We were pleasantly surprised how well the buses worked in cold weather. That was something we were really concerned about. And we took delivery in February and got it out on the road in some 4-degree days. So it was a good opportunity to test them. And the buses actually performed better than expected in that weather. And then even with a load fully with students, they were still able to do all of our routes successfully that they were assigned to. So we were really pleasantly surprised by that.
Excellent. And then Jasmine or Bryant from Dallas.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and speak to that, Eric. We haven't broken ground on our infrastructure yet, but I will say that it has caused us to develop a closer relationship with Encore, our utility. And I'll also add this, that it's caused us to rethink our workforce development department and the relationships we have with Dallas Community College as well. So that's advancing career and technical education.
Excellent. Excellent. And then, so yeah, both, workforce development and certainly Jackie, it's great to always hear positive surprises as well of like, hey, this actually works, that's the, it's a great part. It's easy to spend a lot of time planning and worrying about all of the challenges, but broad brush, the technology works and is real, which is always a good reminder. So thanks for that. Brittany, I guess from WRI, I guess what are kind of interesting changes or kind of new resources on the horizon do you see coming that will help kind of enable and make this transition easier or smoother for folks?
In terms of resources, WRI is planning on putting out, we actually just put out a total cost of ownership calculator, which I think I dropped in the chat and mentioned at the end. We're very much focused on the Clean School Bus grant program. So we will have a template narrative that anyone can download and use. That should be ready very shortly. So trying to pre-fill in some of the content and make it easier for school districts, because we know a 15-page application is a lot more cumbersome than the rebate round, and we want to make sure that districts are able to apply for it. We're continuing to put out vignettes or mini case studies to showcase electric school buses in different areas. We have 2 of those coming out soon, one on Austin, Texas, and their commitment to full fleet electrification, and then another one actually highlighting repowers for Logan Bus Company in New York. So those are some of the newest ones that I can think of that will be coming out soon.
Great. Excellent. Thanks, Brittany. I think that about wraps up our time for questions. So First off, a big thank you to our panelists for sharing their time and expertise today. Again, the world moves fast in electric school bus